Okay, today we're going to talk about modal verbs. Some of them, not all of them. Mainly we're going to talk about can, could, would, and should. But before we go into each particular one, let's talk about what are modal verbs and what's the form and the structure and how we use them in general. Okay, so first, like I said, we're going to talk about structure and use of the modal verb. Okay, what are modal verbs? Here we can see that they are auxiliary verbs that provide additional and specific meaning to the main verb of the sentence. So, very important, first of all, these modal verbs are not going to be the main verb of the sentence. Okay, so what's the structure? It's very simple. We have a subject plus modal verb plus the main verb, okay, or the greater verb, okay. And here we have an example of that. Subject is Mary. Mary could play the piano, okay. So we have subject, which is Mary, the modal verb, in this case could, plus the main verb, play, and then the rest of the sentence. She could play the piano. Okay. Now let's go back real quick to the definition of the modal verb. And the main part of this definition is these modal verbs, they give us additional and specific meaning to the main verb. So on this sentence, Mary could play the piano. What information, what additional meaning or information is the modal verb giving us regarding the main verb? Okay, could, it's a modal verb that is telling us about ability or capacity to do something. Okay, so in this case, the modal verb is telling us about Mary's capacity to play the piano. Okay, that's the effect of the modal verb on this sentence. Okay, now let's talk about the form of modal verbs and some of the characteristics of these verbs. Okay, first we see they do not accept conjugation. These verbs we cannot conjugate. Okay, and they do not need other auxiliary verbs. Okay, they can work by themselves. They really don't need. There's no need for additional auxiliary verbs. Okay, now very important. Another characteristic of these verbs is there is no s in the singular. Okay, remember when we conjugate on the third person, we add an s. Well, not with these verbs. Okay, the correct way is he can. Here we have our modal verb. He can swim. This is correct. What this rule is telling us about is we cannot do. He can swim. This is third person. We don't need to add an s. Okay, it's not that we don't need. We can't. Okay, it doesn't work that way. So this would be incorrect. Okay, so again, there is no s in the singular form. Okay, now another rule is there is no do or does in the question form. Okay, usually we use for most verbs do or does when we are asking a question, but not with the modal verbs. Okay, we have an example here. Would you like to come with me? Okay, this is a correct way to ask using a modal verb. In this case, the verb is would. Would you like to come with me? Okay, according to this rule, we cannot say, do you would like to come with me? normally with other verbs, we would use do or does when we're asking a question. Again, do you want to come with me? Okay, that's fine. But if we're using a modal verb like would, in this case, again, we cannot use do or does. This is incorrect. Okay, now let's move on. Another rule, another characteristic of these modal verbs is there is no don't or doesn't in the negative form. Okay, this doesn't apply to modal verbs. The don't or doesn't. Okay, for instance, we have a couple of sentence here. They can't be serious. That is correct. And later on, we're going to talk about how to form questions, how to form negatives. Okay, for now, I'm just explaining the main characteristics or the rules of these modal verbs. Okay, so again, modal verbs, we can't use don't or doesn't in the negative form of the verb in a sentence. They can't be serious. That's good. They don't can be serious. That's incorrect. That's why we just crossed it there. Okay. Now moving on. Modal verbs don't have infinitives or ing forms. For most verbs, we do have the base form, which is the infinitive, and as you remember, for the infinitive form, we have to and the verb to swim, to run, to sleep, to eat, etc. Okay? Modal verbs, no such thing. There's no to on or infinitive form for these verbs, and also no ing, no gerund, nor or a continuous form. So modal verb can, we cannot say to can or canning. Same thing with could. For example, to could or coulding. That is incorrect. There's no infinitive or ing form for these verbs. Okay? And lastly, for now, for this segment, we see that the modal verbs are followed by an infinitive without to. Like we said on the previous rule, infinitives usually have or can have to swim, to run, to walk. Okay? When we are using modal verbs, modal verbs is always going to be followed by the main verb, but in the infinitive form, we don't have the to for the main verb. Okay? Let's see an example. She can sing. Okay, that's correct. We don't have to, and this is infinitive, sing. We don't say she can to sing. She can to sleep, etc. Okay, he could play soccer in his youth. Okay, we don't say this is correct, but we don't say or we cannot say he could to play soccer in his youth. Okay, and this is all for this segment. We'll continue with more information in a minute.